Hi, Mom.
Good morning, darling daughter.
Today's yoga question is, what is the difference as a yoga teacher? How do you know the difference between trying to please your students and trying to challenge your students?
Well, I think actually it's a broader question than that. Um, I think what happens to young teachers, it happened to me, and it's happened with new teachers I've talked with. So we stand on the mat in front of these people, thinking first and foremost, why did I ever agree to do this? I must have been out of my mind. What will I possibly say for an hour and a half?
Yeah.
We have some anxiety, and so we we care so much about this work. We love this work. We want to share this work, but we want to do it in a way that is helpful, encouraging, and broadens people's perspectives. So sometimes I think we can fall into the trap of believing that we have to teach in a certain manner or in a certain order or a certain style,
Mm-hmm.
that if we fail to do that, we will lose our students. And so we get caught, and I've talked to teachers, one just the other day, well, I'd really like to teach more restorative in my class, but I'm afraid that they won't like it.
Mm-hmm.
And personally, I was teaching in another method initially, and then was I was studying the Iyengar method, but teaching another method for at least a year or more, over a year, because the Iyengar method was so different. I didn't understand it. I loved it, but I didn't know why I loved it, and I wasn't did not feel it was appropriate, or did not feel that I had the ability to teach it yet. And this is another sort of side point, is we need to integrate what we learn into ourselves before we teach it. That is the key. That is why we feel anxious, because we don't know what we know in ourselves. We only know what we know in our very fallible brain. So we feel anxious. Well, so back to the story. So one day, and we always started our classes lying down in the dark, wearing our white cotton yoga pants on our little yoga rug. And one day, I just turned on the lights and I said, okay, everybody stand up. We're going to do a pose called Utthita Trikonasana. And they groaned and moaned. And I lost half my students. But for me, I was so now, I want to say a convert, but that has implications I don't like. I was so entranced with this method. It began to make so much sense in my energy patterns, in my body, in my mind. It started to really change my practice in ways that I liked. So I could no longer ignore it. So I just jumped off the metaphoric cliff. I started teaching the method. And as I say, I lost half my students. But then I started building more clientele and more uh, faithful clientele, and all went well.
Mm-hmm.
So the moral of the story for me, which I'm humbly willing to share with you and anyone who wants to listen, is that you must not be afraid that you won't please the student. You must have confidence in what you know, and not an aggressive way and not an arrogant way. But to be an effective teacher, you have to teach what is alive in you deeply, what you trust, what you feel, what you know, because you're going to enjoy that, and the student will enjoy it also. And everything else will take care of itself.
Yeah, I like that because sometimes I catch myself thinking, oh, my class is big today. I must be great. Oh, my class is small today. I'm a bad teacher. They don't like it.
Be comforted in knowing that every yoga teacher in the universe has had that thought.
Okay, so I've heard you also say that we need to teaching is about teaching people how to practice. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, to me, the practice of yoga is not something I do on Wednesday from 11 to 12. the practice of yoga, as I let all of it in over the decades into my consciousness, into my life, is about the way I live. And so I'm wanting it to leave the practice to leave not just the practice in the narrow sense of asana, pranayama, and meditation, but the wider practice of it, self-study and introspection and devotion. And so I'm wanting the wider practice to leave its samskaras, its footprints on the beach, if you will, on me. And in order to do that, the practice ultimately has to be mine. Even if I took a class from Krishna himself, or Shiva, the first yogi, I would be scared to take a practice.
Me too.
Shiva with his trident and his fierce nature. But if I'm going to really become the practice, live the practice, sing the practice in my cells, I have to own it. And so to me, the first sign that someone is making real progress in this art is that they're practicing by themselves. One of the great lucky things for me was when I started practicing, there weren't classes on every corner. Mm-hmm. And if you wanted this practice, I mean, there were classes, but you did it on your own. I think I've told you the story that I got up the next morning after my first class. I was so profoundly affected in this recognition of something that it was like a recognition, something so precious for me. And that I got up the next day and did what I remembered, which wasn't a lot, but I did it. And I will tell you that I didn't, quote unquote, remember Shavasana, unquote, because I hated that pose.
Wait, Judith Hansen-Lassiter hated Shavasana?
I know. Judge me as you will. So I got up and practiced. And so I think that what we need to do and be aware of as teachers is that one of the main two things in our work is to teach people how to practice on their own. Mm-hmm. Because when they practice on their own, they make another deeper, I believe, my prejudice is, level of awareness. They notice their resistance. They notice that they have judgments about doing it right or wrong. They notice all kinds of things that are part of a broader practice. So even if you do a class that's a flow class, and you're not stopping, as we sometimes do in the Iyengar system, I would suggest and have suggested to those teachers, okay, they come in for class, say, oh, today we're going to spend 5 minutes breaking down dog pose and looking at how we can make that more safe for ourselves, more effective, more deep, if that's what we want, more present, through bringing attention to how, not just what we do, but how we do it. So, and then go on with your class. And then the next class say, okay, today we're going to look at jumping through, or today we're going to look at whatever it is for 5 minutes. And they will like that. They'll say, oh, my elbow doesn't hurt when I do it that way. Thank you. That was great. And then you can add in that attention, that awareness to like walking meditation. When you're walking, you're moving. But in walking meditation, you slow it down and you observe each footfall and each lifting of the back foot. And you observe and stay present with you listen to all the instruments in the orchestra. You're not just listening to the violin section. You're listening to how every part of your body is moving. And this creates, of course, reflective awareness and reflective intelligence, which then they can bring, oh yes, what was it she said about dog? Oh yes, this way in dog pose. And they're paying attention and they're owning it. So teaching people how to practice is not just giving them an experience of the practice, which definitely is important, but always teaching them about practice.
So the last part, I really like that. So the last part of this question for me is, in this era of social media, I sometimes catch myself thinking about teaching yoga as a popularity contest. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, yes. So luckily for me, when I started, it was never, it was that question would have not made any sense because, if you had 25 students in your class or 20 students or 15, it was like, oh my God. Because people in the old days, uh, back in the day, often if you said, I teach yoga, people stopped talking to you and moved away. Or they said, why do you want to lie on nails?
Yeah.
And of course, it's not lying on nails. But actually, as I got into it more deeply, I began to understand it in a certain way. It was metaphorically like lying on nails. I was right. So another funny thing about that is my first year of teaching, one of my students, God bless him, gave me a copy of Light on Yoga, which, as you know, has many photos in the back. So like every normal, ambitious student, did I read the book? Oh, no. I turned to the back, to the poses, and I started trying to do them. And I couldn't do a lot. I couldn't do them. Like I couldn't do them. And so I closed the book and I said to myself, no one can do these poses. So then I married your father and we moved off into the country. And one day I got the book down and I looked at the poses and I said, well, maybe I'll try these. And I started believing that I could do them. And then once again, after several years into the practice of doing them every day, I realized nobody can do these poses, which is why I like yoga. There's no goal. There's no end. There's no you're there. There's no you're done. All right. So popularity. It is, if I may say so boldly, the biggest of traps. Buddha said, supposedly, fame is the last attachment to go. So I've thought a lot about that. And of course, I said no. It must be something else.
Buddha must have been mistaken.
Yes. But the Buddha would like that we would think that, I think, that we would take in the teaching in a deep way and consider it and choose it, not just have it spoon fed to us. As Buddha said it must, that we have developed our discrimination, not just our understanding. So he said it was the last attachment to go. And it is a destructive mistress, fame. So the way I put it is, don't believe your own press releases because it's a trap. I remember when you children were young and I would go off to teach a workshop for a weekend. And I used to call it my 48-hour turnaround once a month when you were old enough for me to do that. But I would come back and there would be, poopy diaper in the hall and no milk. And one of you would come to me and say, Mommy, we don't have any milk. And I'm like, there's a store 2 blocks away you could have gone, but I didn't say that. And suddenly I was mommy and I wasn't a yoga teacher who people, someone might have graciously said, that was a great workshop. I really liked it. I got a lot out of it. And I would be feeling really, enjoy that what I love was benefiting other people. It's like giving someone you care about what you believe is the perfect gift and they just light up and you get as much, if not more joy from their joy. Because when you give to someone from your heart, you get so much back. And so I would be, of course, feeling happy that I had done my job and that I had enjoyed it and they had enjoyed it and it's fulfilling my dharma. And then I'd kind of float in and then it would be, back to reality. And it was really helpful. It reminded me, of a deeper value of what I do and the importance of being that open-hearted and person when I was home with dealing with the needing milk and the tub running over and the children who are, whining. My perfect children never whine, but imagine that they did. So fame and popularity are a trap because then we begin to act in ways, I think, to make that more. We get ambitious, we get attached, we get more concerned about how many people are in the workshop, not how can I approach this great art with joy and humility, and let it flow through me and offer this group of people my true self with compassion and love. We get caught up in that. And it's such a seductive way to go. And today there are a lot of yoga teachers who are quote unquote famous. But I sometimes wonder if maybe the best yoga teachers in the world we don't know, because they live it quietly in India somewhere, in a cave or in a village, or in a living it, being it, and that what we get caught up in is what the world tells us about our yoga and not what our heart does.
So beautiful. That's the perfect place to end. Thank you, Mama.
You are most welcome, both as a student and teacher of yoga, but importantly as my daughter.
Namaste.
Namaste.
If you enjoyed listening to this conversation, you might also be interested in an 8-episode audio course that my mom and I are recording. The format is based on the newly released 2nd edition of her book, Living Your Yoga. And the course includes, the book and the course also includes 3 new chapters on relaxation, empathy, and worship. And the course is already available for pre-sale on Mom's website, judithhansenlassiter.com. Thanks so much for listening.